Gret came to consciousness with a broken rib and the smell of burning composite in his nostrils, and the first thing he did was reach for his sidearm. It was gone. The holster was still there, the retention strap torn free, the weapon somewhere in the wreckage field outside. His left forearm was pinned under a collapsed equipment rack, and when he pulled it free, the pain told him something was fractured, not broken clean, not yet, but damaged enough to matter. He cataloged it the way his instructors had taught him, fact, not feeling. Structural damage, non-critical. He could work with the arm. The scout pod had come down hard. He could see sky through a rupture in the hull plating above him, gray sky, the thin gray light of a moon with no breathable atmosphere outside the pressure systems that still functioned. Those systems were running on battery. He did not know how long the batteries would last. He knew he was on Verath's Hollow because there was nowhere else it could be. The two ships had found each other at the outer edge of the system, his intercept craft and the human vessel that had been running dark through Vrethkai survey space, and they had killed each other in approximately 40 seconds. He had ejected in the pod at the last moment. He assumed the human had done the same. The Dominion's tactical briefings on human combat protocols indicated they maintained emergency escape capability on all Scout-class vessels. He was not supposed to let a human reach a pod. He pulled himself upright and took stock of his situation. The pod had rolled on impact, and the interior was a rotated mess. Equipment that had been secured to the ceiling was now on the floor. Everything from the floor was piled against one wall, and the secondary console was buried under the collapsed equipment rack. He found his survival pack, still secured in its crash harness, and ran through the inventory. Emergency rations, 12 days. Atmospheric recycler, functional. Emergency beacon, damaged, transmitting on reduced power, signal range unknown. Medical kit, intact. The Dominion fleet would be running a debris scan. They would find the transponder eventually. He just needed to last long enough. He was checking the recycler's output flow when he heard something move on the far side of the pod. It was behind the main console housing, a section of the pod that had crumpled inward enough to create an accidental partition. He had not looked there. He moved toward it now with the survival knife in his right hand, fractured left arm held close, and pushed the partition plate aside with his shoulder. The human was there. She was young. That was the first thing that struck him, not what he had expected, not a veteran, not the kind of person whose file the Dominion briefings described when they said human combatant. She was small, even for a human, with dark hair matted against her forehead and a gash along her jaw that had bled through the emergency bandage she had applied. Her eyes were open. She was watching him. One of her hands was wrapped around a piece of broken hull strut, not long enough to be a weapon, but the intention was clear. She said something in her language. He did not speak it. He kept the knife where it was. The Dominion's standing order for first contact with human forces was simple. No engagement at speaking range, no communication, terminate immediately. They were a contagion species. That was the approved language in the tactical briefings, repeated so often it had become background noise. They expanded without limit. They compromised systems. They were to be addressed only at weapons range and only with finality. He stood there with the knife, and she stood there with the broken strut, and neither of them did anything for several seconds. Then the atmospheric recycler behind him clicked, cycled, and fell silent. The status light shifted from green to amber. She looked at it. He looked at it. The amber light had a particular quality, the universal vocabulary of machinery in trouble, and apparently it translated across species without difficulty, because she looked back at him and said something different this time. Not a threat. He did not know how he knew that, but he knew it the way he knew a loaded weapon from an empty one, not from the words, which meant nothing to him, but from the way she said them. He kept the knife but took a step back. She took a step toward the recycler. He let her. She worked on the recycler for 11 minutes. He watched. She opened 3 access panels he had not known existed, traced a power routing issue through a junction block, bypassed a failed sensor with a wire from her own survival kit, and had the unit back to green. She did it efficiently, without wasted motion, and when it was finished she turned to look at him with an expression he could not fully parse, part assessment, part something else. He was not supposed to find her competence noteworthy. The briefings had not prepared him for the experience of watching an enemy do something well. The situation was this: 1 pod, 12 days of rations, an emergency beacon transmitting on reduced power, 1 fractured arm, and the fact that neither of them was getting off this moon without a working rescue signal. The recycler fix had bought them time. The beacon problem was different. The antenna relay had sheared on impact and was transmitting at roughly 1/4 of its rated power. 1/4 power from Vrethkai's hollow meant the signal would reach the inner system in 17 days if the interference patterns cooperated, longer if they did not. He had 12 days of rations. She apparently arrived at a similar calculation, because she pointed at the beacon housing, then at him, then at the damaged relay section with the broken strut still in her hand. He put the knife away. They worked on the beacon for 4 hours. It was not easy. They had no shared language, no common technical vocabulary, and their hands were different. She had 5 fingers where he had 4. Her grip strength was different. The way she thought about mechanical problems was different. She worked from the outside in. He worked from the inside out. There were 3 instances in those 4 hours where they were both reaching for the same component at the same time, and each of them pulled back. There was 1 instance where he reached past her, and she went rigid for a half second before she controlled it, and he noted it and moved more slowly after that. She noticed. She said something short and flat that he would only understand much later, when the translators finally had enough data, but which his instructors would have classified as acknowledging a tactical adjustment. By the time the beacon relay was jury-rigged back to 60% power, the emergency lighting had cycled down to secondary output, and the temperature inside the pod had dropped 14 degrees. They sat on opposite sides of the recycler, the one warm thing in the space, and did not speak, because they could not, but the silence between them had changed in quality from what it had been when he had held the knife. She pulled a ration bar from her pack. She broke it in half and held 1/2 out to him. He stared at it. The briefings covered this. Human sharing behaviors were documented as social bonding mechanisms, a form of chemical and psychological manipulation, a tool of the contagion. The approved response was refusal. The reasoning was sound, and he had never had cause to question it before now. He took the half ration. It was not what he had expected. Too sweet, slightly chemical in the aftertaste, nothing like Vrethkai field rations. He ate it. She watched him with the same careful attention he had given the recycler, and then looked satisfied, which was not the expression he would have anticipated from someone who had just handed food to an enemy. On the second day, she found paper in the emergency kit, crash log sheets meant for situation recording, and she began to draw. She drew her ship. She drew his intercept craft. She drew the collision. She drew the pod coming down. She drew a circle with a small figure and a second small figure inside it, and she pointed to the 2 figures and then to the 2 of them. He understood that she was explaining that she understood what he already understood, that they were in this together until the beacon reached someone. He took the paper and drew the Dominion fleet, schematically, the patrol pattern, the response timeline, the expected search radius. He was not sure why he did it. The briefings would have classified it as a security breach. He did it anyway. She studied his drawing for a long time. Then she drew a parallel image, her own fleet search pattern, her own response timeline, the same schematic reasoning. They were, he realized, comparing rescue scenarios side by side, each of them providing information that could theoretically be used against the other. Neither of them did anything with the information, except use it to calculate that the Dominion fleet would reach search range on day 9. Her fleet would reach it on day 11. They could both last that long, probably. On day 3, she got sick. Whatever microbial incompatibility existed between their ecosystems, it hit her immune system hard and fast: fever, reduced coordination, the particular look that any species recognized when a living thing was failing. He understood, in a clinical way, that this was not strategically useful. If she died, he had the pod to himself, but he also had no one to help with any problem that required 2 sets of hands, and a dead body in an enclosed, recycled atmosphere was an atmospheric management problem the recycler had not been designed for. He also understood, in a different way that he did not try to classify, that watching something fail when you could prevent it required a deliberate choice not to act, and that the choice itself had a weight he had not expected. He opened the medical kit. Most of it was useless to her. The medications were calibrated for Vrethkai biology, the wound treatments designed for Vrethkai tissue. But the fever management protocol was based on physical temperature reduction rather than pharmaceutical intervention. He followed it methodically, the way he had been trained to follow anything critical. Step by step, no deviations, no improvisation. She was not conscious enough to protest, or to be afraid of him, or to hold a piece of broken hull strut. She was simply sick, and he was the only thing available that had hands and a medical kit, and so he applied the cooling protocols through the night. He sat with her through the worst of it, not because the protocols required presence, but because the recycler's amber light was still cycling, and he wanted to catch it early if it failed again. That was what he told himself. He was not certain it was the whole truth. By the 4th morning, her fever had broken. She looked at him when she woke, looked at him with a directness that was slightly unsettling, a willingness to hold eye contact that the Vrethkai did not practice with strangers. He looked back. She said something he could not understand. He said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would cross the language gap. She was quiet for a moment after that, and he could see her assembling the facts of the situation the way he had: the cooling residue on the blanket, the open medical kit, the evidence of what had been done while she was unconscious. She looked at all of it, and then she looked at him again. Then she did something unexpected. She reached out and placed her hand over the fracture in his forearm, gently, with a care that was obviously deliberate, and held it there for a moment. Not treatment, not manipulation. Some kind of acknowledgement communicated the only way available to her. He did not pull away. He was not sure what to call what he felt instead, so he filed it in the same category he had used for everything else about her: fact, not feeling, observed, noted. The beacon reached the Dominion patrol on day 8. The extraction team arrived on day 9 and found them in the same pod, alive, the atmospheric recycler running at full capacity and the emergency log full of hand-drawn diagrams, patrol routes, biological data, mechanical repair sequences. The extraction team's commander, a senior officer named Vrethkai, reviewed the log and then looked at Gret for a long time without speaking. The human was taken to one of the escort ships, and Gret was taken to the other, and the 2 vessels maintained the correct tactical separation, and that was the correct protocol. But Vrethkai asked Gret 3 questions in the debrief, and the third one was, "What did you learn?" Gret thought about it for a moment. He thought about the recycler, and the beacon, and the fever, and the hand placed carefully over a fracture, and 9 days of drawings that had communicated more than words. He thought about the briefings, the approved language, the tactical doctrine that had been background noise for so long it had stopped sounding like a choice. "I learned," Gret said, "that we have been fighting an enemy we have never actually met." The debrief record showed that Vrethkai marked the statement as a security concern, flagged for review. It also showed, in the margin notation that Vrethkai added at the bottom of the page in his own hand, 1 sentence: corroborated by observed evidence. The formal first contact protocols between the Vrethkai Dominion and the Terran continuity were established 11 months later at a neutral station at the edge of shared space. Gret was not present. He was still on restricted status, pending the review. But the officer who led the Dominion's delegation had read his debrief report, and she opened the first formal session by setting a hand-drawn diagram on the table between the two delegations. A circle, two figures, a simple image of shared enclosure. The Terran delegation looked at it for a moment. Then their lead negotiator, a young woman with a faint scar along her jaw, set a matching diagram beside it. The session lasted 4 days and ended in a framework agreement. It was not the ending anyone had planned. It was the ending that 9 days on a cold moon had made possible, because two enemies had been stripped of every advantage but the fundamental one, the one that turned out to matter more than either side's doctrine had accounted for. They were both the kind of thing that fixed broken machinery and carried the other through a fever, even when the orders said otherwise.